Some families trade their legacy, others trade their own blood. Sounds unimaginable, right? But what if I told you this tale, starting with a young woman sold as a virgin to the most feared man in America, isn't about defeat, but about fierce resilience? Beneath the heartbreak lies a love so powerful, it bends destiny itself. This story will grip you tight. It will stir your anger, quicken your pulse, and maybe, just maybe, make you believe even the hardest souls can be broken by the right kind of love. If you're brave enough to stay till the very end, prepare yourself, for what begins in vengeance will end in salvation. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. And if this story stirs something deep inside you, subscribe, hit the bell, and share it with someone who needs to hear it, because a love like this can't be forgotten. Ivy Lancaster was 25, and tonight, everything she believed in was shattering. Her father's cold voice cut through the silence, sharp and commanding. "Get your things together. We leave soon." He didn't bother explaining anything, but Ivy had already heard enough. Through the thin walls, she'd overheard the hushed conversation, her fate being sealed like a commodity. He was selling her, his own daughter. His eyes gleamed not with love or concern, but with raw greed. Power and money mattered more to him than his blood. Ivy's heart broke, knowing the man who was supposed to protect her was trading her like a prize. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she silently packed her belongings. She was still untouched, a virgin, never kissed, never loved. It was a vow she made long ago, a sacred promise to her late mother. Her mother had died young, taken by fibroid complications, leaving Ivy with a legacy of love and hope. One last wish that Ivy would save herself for the man she truly loved, the one worthy of her heart. Now, that promise was on the verge of being ripped apart by a deal she never agreed to. Morris Anderson was a man whose reputation alone commanded both respect and fear across the United States. His name was enough to open doors that remained closed to most, a symbol of relentless power and unyielding control. Known for his iron will and unbending discipline, Morris ruled his world with cold precision, leaving little room for mercy or compromise. That day, Ivy Lancaster sat quietly in the car beside her father, Andrew Lancaster, her heart pounding with dread as he drove her toward Morris's office. Inside, waiting in the sterile, polished room were only a handful of people who would decide her fate. Her 3 brothers, Morris himself, his family lawyer, and a few other wealthy associates whose presence filled the space with an intimidating air of authority. The scent of expensive cologne and leather hung heavily, underscoring the seriousness of what was to come. Ivy's hands trembled uncontrollably as she glanced at her father, desperate for answers. Why me? Why do this? Isn't there any other way? Anything that doesn't make me the price to pay? Her voice broke, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. Morris's red-rimmed eyes showed no flicker of sympathy. He was fully aware of their helplessness, and he made no effort to hide the fact. His silence was cold, a reminder that mercy had no place in this transaction. Her father, struggling to keep his voice steady, pressed her to sign, insisting it was for the good of the family. The company, their only lifeline, was on the brink of collapse, drowning in debt that only Morris had the power to erase. "Think of your brothers," her father urged. "Everything depends on this company. If it collapses, they all suffer." Ivy's heart rebelled against the cruel logic. "Why must I be the one to sacrifice my life to save theirs?" she whispered, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. No one seemed to notice her pain or care for her shattered dreams. Her gaze flickered to her brothers, silently pleading for a sign, any hint they might change their minds. But their faces were unreadable, cold. She didn't see concern or sorrow. Instead, there was something else. Fear. Not fear for her, but fear of losing their privilege, the power, the status. the places their name could still open. The thought of poverty, of being shut out from the circles they once moved in, gripped them tighter than any love for their sister ever could. Ivy's hand trembled as she reached for the pen, the weight of the moment crushing her chest. As the ink met the paper, salty tears slipped from her eyes, blotting the contract that sealed her fate. Across the table, her father's lips twitched in a fleeting, almost imperceptible smile, a hint of relief that shattered her from within. The drive to Morris Anderson's estate was quiet, the silence thick and heavy. The sprawling mansion rose like a fortress against the horizon, its grand towers piercing the sky, surrounded by immaculately trimmed hedges and shimmering fountains that whispered of untouchable wealth. Ivy was no longer a Lancaster. She had become an Anderson, bound to a name that carried power but no warmth. Morris had already left for a meeting, never mixing business with personal affairs. She was brought home alone, to a life meticulously arranged yet cold and confining. Her room was vast, luxuriously appointed with soft linens and polished wood, but the walls felt like a cage. She sank onto the edge of the bed, gazing out at the perfectly manicured garden that stretched beyond tall stone walls, tears streaming freely down her face. This was not her life. It was a gilded prison. Late that evening, the heavy footsteps of Morris Anderson echoed down the grand hallway, each step reverberating through the stillness like a cold warning. Ivy pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering violently in her chest, every beat a reminder of the fear and anger tangled inside her. He didn't pause, didn't glance her way. His indifference was a sharp blade slicing through any hope she might have held. The silence that followed his passing was suffocating, thick with everything left unsaid and all the cruelty wrapped in his absence. Hunger gnawed at her, but she refused to eat, the thought of swallowing anything feeling like surrender. Death, in that moment, seemed a far better fate than enduring a life where she was nothing more than a pawn in his ruthless game. The dining room stretched vast and empty around them, the long, polished table a silent divide between Ivy and Morris as they sat at opposite ends. Morris moved with deliberate precision, each cut of his knife measured and exact, his calm demeanor radiating control. Ivy's fingers traced the rim of her plate, pushing bits of food aimlessly, refusing to let it touch her lips, despite the persistent rumble in her stomach that betrayed her claim of emptiness. The silence stretched taut, until Morris's voice finally broke through, steady and unyielding. "You're not eating," she replied quickly, voice low and steady. "I'm not hungry," just as a sudden, unmistakable growl escaped from her stomach. She averted her eyes, cheeks flushing with a mix of embarrassment and defiance. Morris's lips curved into a slow, sharp smile, heavy with mockery and something colder beneath. "Eat before you starve yourself," he said smoothly. "You clearly need it." The words settled heavily between them, carrying the weight of unspoken battles yet to come. The next day dawned with a muted rhythm that seemed to swallow Ivy whole. The household moved with precise, practiced efficiency. The staff's eyes rarely met hers, their steps silent and purposeful, as if she were a ghost wandering through familiar halls. No greetings were offered, no conversations sparked, only a quiet, impenetrable routine. Determined to understand her new world, Ivy observed everything. The exact moments Morris departed and returned, the locked doors she dared not open, the hush that clung to every corridor. The house was a fortress of silence and unyielding order. Then, one morning, she paused outside a closed door, catching fragments of a phone conversation. Morris's voice was low, tight with conflict and urgency. "I'm not supposed to be doing this, but I am. She's here. That's all that matters." The weight of those words struck Ivy with cold clarity. This was no simple rescue of a failing company. There was a deeper, darker truth woven into the fabric of her new existence. That evening, Ivy chose to dress with intention, elegant yet unapologetic, refusing to fade into the background or be treated like a shadow. She was done feeling invisible, done drowning in a reality she couldn't control. What had happened was irreversible, but now she resolved to turn it to her advantage. As she entered the room, she caught Morris stealing quick, sharp glances her way, eyes narrowing with a flicker of surprise. He hadn't anticipated this. Her poised confidence, the way she moved with ownership, commanding the space as if it belonged to her. He was accustomed to obedience and quiet compliance, to power bending others to his will. But Ivy was different, and in that difference lay a quiet defiance that unsettled him deeply. Morris waited in the grand dining hall, his presence commanding the space as he expected Ivy to arrive on schedule. The table was meticulously set, the silver gleaming under the soft light, every detail arranged to reflect the order he demanded. Yet word came that Ivy had eaten earlier, in her room, breaking the unspoken rule that meals were to be taken under his watchful eye. Morris's expression darkened, a flicker of irritation passing through his otherwise composed demeanor. He was a man who expected those around him to follow his rules without question, to operate within the boundaries he set, believing the world revolved solely around his control. But Ivy had chosen this act of quiet defiance deliberately, using it as a way to unsettle him, to send a message that she would not be contained by his expectations or demands. Sitting alone in her room, she took her meal on her own terms, a small but potent rebellion in a life dictated by others. The sun filtered softly through the curtains, casting warm light across the quiet space she claimed as her own sanctuary. The calm was shattered by the sound of Morris's footsteps approaching, heavy and deliberate. "I thought you knew the rules." His voice cut through the silence, low and sharp with unmistakable authority. Ivy didn't turn to face him right away. Instead, she met his gaze calmly from across the room. "I know the rules. That doesn't mean I have to follow them." Morris closed the distance, stopping just behind her, the tension thick enough to be felt, a charged current pulsing between them like the moment before a storm breaks. "This isn't a game, Ivy." Slowly, she turned to him, her eyes steady and unyielding, a quiet defiance that unsettled him. "No, it's not," she said. "But if it were, you'd already be losing." For a moment, Morris's composed façade wavered. He was accustomed to control masked by fear and obedience disguised as respect. But Ivy played by no one's rules but her own, wielding resistance as her most potent weapon. That evening, Ivy requested a simple dish, steamed salmon with lemon and herbs, but was instead served a rich, heavy lamb stew, thick with spices, and unmistakably not what she had ordered. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she set down her fork, voice steady, yet edged with quiet challenge. "I asked for salmon." Morris didn't flinch. His tone was cold, deliberate. "In my house, the menu follows my rules." Without hesitation, Ivy met his gaze, unwavering, a flicker of defiance burning in her eyes. "This isn't just your house," she replied, rising smoothly from her seat. "And I'm no guest who will quietly accept every command." She turned, her movements deliberate, leaving no room for doubt that she refused to be controlled. From the corner of her eye, she caught the tightening of his jaw, the storm brewing behind his measured expression as he fought to contain his rising frustration. Just as she reached the door, his voice stopped her, a low warning laced with authority. For the first time, his voice cracked like a warning. "You're tempting fate, Ivy." She held his gaze, voice steady but fierce. "I'd rather face the flames than freeze in silence." Then she walked away, leaving the unspoken battle hanging heavy in the air. That night, Morris had the doors to the West Wing locked, the very part of the house where Ivy had found solace in the quiet sanctuary of the art room. It was there she had spent hours the day before, her hands moving deliberately over paper, sketching lines that helped untangle the chaos in her mind. Drawing was more than a pastime. It was her refuge, a place where the noise of her new reality softened, and she could reclaim a fragment of herself. Closing off that space felt like another attempt at control, a petty move designed to frustrate her, but Ivy refused to let it break her spirit. Instead, she wandered barefoot through the cold marble halls under the cover of darkness, a restless presence refusing to be confined. On one such night, their paths crossed in the grand main hall. Ivy wore a light nightgown, her hair loose, her skin glowing softly in the silver moonlight streaming through the towering windows. Morris stood there, still clad in his suit, a glass of whiskey in hand, his gaze flickering with a mix of irritation and reluctant intrigue. He wanted to assert his dominance, to remind her he was in charge, but Ivy's calm defiance was unyielding. "Trying to provoke me?" he asked. Calm and steady, she replied, "I'm just trying to live. If that unsettles you, maybe the problem isn't mine." For the first time in days, a small, sharp smile curved his lips, cynical, captivated. "You're different. Not at all what I expected." Ivy stepped closer, just a single step, but it was enough to tilt the balance. "Maybe that's why you despise me," she whispered. "Because you can't control me. Because I'm not her." Morris's eyes darkened, and beneath the carefully constructed armor of control, a fracture appeared. Without a word, he turned away, casting the last of his whiskey into the fire before walking off, his shoulders rigid with tension. Yet Ivy sensed she had touched something raw, a hidden wound she didn't fully understand, but one that was destined to unravel. That night, Morris lay alone on his vast, cold bed, the weight of a pain he had long tried to bury, pressing down on him relentlessly. It was a torment he neither fully understood nor knew how to soothe, an ache that haunted him in the quiet moments when control slipped away. In a moment of raw vulnerability, he reached for a knife, the cold steel heavy in his hand. Slowly, almost mechanically, he pressed the blade to his skin, tracing shallow cuts that burned sharply. Crimson droplets welled up and fell silently onto the sheets below, each drop a bitter testament to the wounds hidden beneath his hardened exterior. The sting offered a twisted release, a fleeting reminder that some pain is too deep to heal, and no matter how much he tried to hide it, it continued to hunt him. Day by day, the relentless torment and crushing silence wore Ivy down, each moment feeling like a slow suffocation, as if the very air around her had turned into a cage. The hardest part wasn't just the loneliness. It was the agonizing truth that she was fighting against someone who neither cared nor noticed her struggle. The weight of being trapped by a man who never wanted her but refused to let her go pressed on her spirit, breaking her piece by piece. She didn't care, neither did she want to be here in the first place. She had everything on paper, a home, security, but inside she felt stripped bare, losing herself with every passing day. The decision had crystallized in her mind. She had to confront Morris, to face the man who kept her captive, to demand the freedom she deserved. That evening, she found him in his study, the flickering light casting shadows over his restless figure. There, as he sat hunched over the desk, he pulled a knife from the drawer, pressing the cold blade repeatedly against his skin, reopening wounds long thought healed. Crimson trails formed like silent cries across his flesh. Ivy's breath caught, tears streaming down her cheeks as exhaustion and pain seeped from her voice. "Please, let me go," she begged, voice cracking under the weight of her despair. "I swear I won't cross your path again." Morris didn't turn to her, but a bitter chuckle escaped him, dark, filled with anger, hatred, and scorn. She met his eyes raw and aching and whispered, "If you don't love me, why keep me?" His gaze hardened, cold and unyielding. "This was never meant to give you comfort or peace," he said quietly, voice heavy with years of bitterness. "You're here to pay for every damn thing your family took from me." Slowly he rose, wiping his hands as if trying to erase the pain that burned beneath the surface. "I didn't marry you out of desire or convenience. I did it for revenge." The words struck her like a sudden blow in the darkness. For a moment she was silent. Only the rustling leaves and the stillness of the world surrounded them. "What?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Every day you live here, every breath you take in this house, it's punishment. Not for you, but for them. Your parents, your bloodline, your legacy. You are the living reminder of what they stole from me." Ivy saw the fury in his eyes, felt it echo like a scream trapped within him, an echo of a vengeance that consumed him more than anyone could see. Ivy's body trembled with exhaustion, but she forced herself to speak, her voice raw yet steady, eyes locked boldly on Morris. "Hurting me for a pain I never caused, pain I don't even understand. That's not strength, Morris. It's cowardice." At the sound of the word, a guttural groan escaped him, his fist crashing violently against the study wall, the harsh impact reverberating through the room. But Ivy didn't waver. Tears streamed down her face, yet she stood firm, her voice breaking with the weight of her truth. She looked at him, voice steady but filled with hurt. "I did nothing to deserve this. You hate me without ever trying to understand who I am." His eyes remained cold, unreadable, showing no sign of remorse or care. "It doesn't matter," he replied quietly. "I don't need to know you to hate what you represent. Your face, your name, your presence, they are all constant reminders of her death." Silence stretched between them for several seconds, thick and suffocating, before she gathered herself to speak again. "I refuse to carry a burden that isn't mine. Your past is yours to heal, not mine to bear." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with unspoken pain and unresolved history. Then, without a word, Morris turned and walked away, leaving Ivy alone with her tears and the oppressive quiet that settled in his wake. She sat alone, tears streaming down her face as the weight of everything crashing around her pressed heavily on her chest. The darkness of the night mirrored the emptiness she felt inside, her sobs quiet but relentless. Then, from the shadows, his voice pierced the silence again, cold, distant, yet unmistakably firm. "6 p.m., dining room. Don't be late." It wasn't just an order. It was a reminder of the life she'd been thrust into. Everything she had been told about this marriage, the lies, the half-truths, now revealed themselves to be only the surface. There was something far deeper, buried beneath layers of pain and secrecy. And now, more than ever, she had a reason to fight, not just for her own freedom, but to uncover the truth he was desperate to keep hidden. That night, sleep eluded Ivy. Her mind churned with questions she couldn't silence. She needed to uncover what had truly happened from the very start. At dawn, she found herself sitting quietly in the garden, watching the staff move through their morning routines with practiced ease. Among them was Mama Grace, one of the eldest and most trusted servants, whose eyes held a rare warmth that Ivy hadn't seen elsewhere. Mama Grace approached cautiously, ensuring no one was watching, and leaned close to whisper in Ivy's ear. Curiosity sparked, Ivy followed her subtle guidance, slipping away toward a place strictly forbidden, the master bedroom. Morris was away, and as Ivy stood outside the door, a tremor of fear and determination coursed through her. She knew that inside lay the answers she so desperately sought, and despite the risk, she was ready to face whatever truths awaited her. The worn wooden table was scattered with photographs, some framed, others loose, each one a frozen fragment of a life Ivy barely understood. Among them lay a battered photo album, its leather cover cracked and softened by time. She opened it carefully, revealing images of a young Morris, no older than 18, smiling brightly, full of hope and warmth, as he stood close to a woman whose presence radiated love and strength. As she flipped through the pages, The years unfolded like a silent story. Happy moments captured under sunlit skies, family gatherings filled with laughter, until she reached a haunting burial photo, solemn and heavy, a stark contrast to the earlier joy. Black ink scrawled aggressively across several pages, notes, accusations, and warnings written in haste and anger. Her fingers trembled as she came upon a page filled with faded handwriting, a narrative from Morris himself. It told of Aaron Lancaster, Ivy's grandfather, a brilliant financial genius who had built a modest empire by the time Morris was just 20. Forced to leave school abruptly to care for his ailing mother, Morris had been thrust into a cruel world far beyond his years. He had been fortunate to work under Aaron Lancaster, but the opportunity turned into a trap. Aaron used Morris's intellect without gratitude, withholding payment and threatening to destroy his career when Morris pleaded for funds to cover his mother's treatment. Not once did Morris ask for money owed, only for mercy for the only person left to him. Yet Aaron remained indifferent, letting the woman he loved slip away to death without support. Vulnerable and broken, Morris worked tirelessly but failed to save the one person he cherished most. Sworn to vengeance, he vowed to take revenge everywhere and by any means possible, his pain fueling a relentless fury that shaped every cold glance and silent punishment. The truth hit Ivy with brutal clarity. She was not merely a reminder of a fractured past, she was the living heir to the sin that shattered Morris's world. Anger surged through her veins like a slow-burning blaze, scorching her chest, tightening her throat, and stinging her eyes with tears. This was the reason for the coldness, the cruelty, the silent sentence she lived under. Yet beneath the smoldering rage, something softer flickered. Compassion. Within the worn pages of that album, Ivy glimpsed the man Morris once was, a man capable of love, of hope, before life carved away his tenderness and replaced it with stone. The door to the room creaked open softly, and Morris stood there, frozen the moment his eyes met Ivy's as she knelt, clutching the open album close to her chest. A heavy silence settled between them, thick with unspoken grief. Morris's body trembled, his voice breaking as he struggled to hold back the tears. He stammered, fighting a flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. In that vulnerable moment, he felt like a failure, a man worn down by relentless pain, tired of carrying a burden he couldn't escape. Slowly, Ivy rose, her voice gentle but unwavering. "She was your whole world, wasn't she?" There was no accusation, only quiet empathy. Morris closed his eyes briefly, his breath shaky as he whispered, "She was the only light I ever had." Ivy stepped forward, the album trembling in her hands. "And that's why you made me the punishment." The arrogance vanished from his face, replaced by exhaustion and sorrow. "I didn't know how else to bear the pain." Time seemed to pause between them, their breaths the only sound filling the room. Ivy stepped quietly into the room, the heavy silence pressing down around Morris like a weight he could no longer bear. She moved toward him slowly, her eyes searching his worn face, the lines of pain and exhaustion etched deep. Standing by the window, his shoulders hunched under the invisible burden of grief and rage, he seemed trapped in a world of his own making. "I don't believe Florence would want you to carry this hatred," Ivy said gently, her voice trembling with sincerity. "She's gone, but I believe what she truly wanted was peace. For you, revenge isn't the legacy she hoped for you to carry." Morris's body trembled slightly, the tension in his muscles betraying the battle raging within. He was caught in the endless cycle of pain, convinced that revenge was the only way to heal, yet all it did was deepen the wounds he hid so fiercely. Ivy reached out, her hand hesitating before she placed it lightly on his arm, a fragile bridge over the chasm of his sorrow. "I spent years drowning in bitterness, haunted by memories and echoes of laughter that no longer filled the rooms," Morris confessed, voice raw and distant. "Florence died because of choices I never made, and yet the world moved on, as if she was never real. Everyone else did, but I never could. Ivy closed the distance, her footsteps deliberate and steady. And now, how much longer will you punish me for sins that aren't mine to bear, for burdens that no higher power would lay on innocent shoulders? He turned slowly, eyes bloodshot, empty of tears, but heavy with defeat. I don't even know who I am anymore, he admitted, voice cracking under the weight of his own confession. Ivy's voice softened, a gentle plea in the quiet room. Then stop. Stop running from the pain, Morris, because when you made me your revenge, you didn't just shatter a life, you destroyed the chance to build something new. In that moment, beneath layers of anger and sorrow, a fragile thread of hope began to weave between them. She stood before him, close enough to feel the restrained heat of a body hardened by years of anger and pain. His voice broke the silence, tentative and low. I'm sorry for how I tried to break you. Ivy's gaze didn't waver. Her voice was steady and fierce. No, you didn't break me. You only made me stronger. He looked at her then, eyes heavy with exhaustion, but clear with newfound respect. Yes, he admitted quietly, you truly are strong. And in that moment, she demanded what she deserved, respect. Morris nodded slowly, the armor of the ruthless tycoon slipping away to reveal a wounded man desperate for change. Ivy saw beyond the façade. Beneath the pain and the fury was someone yearning for healing. She took a breath, determination blazing in her eyes. I'm not fighting for freedom anymore. I'm fighting for justice. Justice for what was stolen, for what we both lost, and maybe for something I haven't yet learned to name. The weight of her words hung between them like a promise and a challenge. She turned to leave, leaving behind the weight of a promise. And as the door closed slowly behind her, he remained there, staring into the void like a man who knew she had started to change everything, even him. The gala was the highlight of the social calendar, a grand affair where appearances mattered above all else. Ivy was expected to accompany Morris as the perfect trophy wife, a symbol of his power and control. But that week, she had carefully avoided him, slipping through the house like a shadow, determined not to give him the satisfaction of her attention. She caught glimpses of him trying to engage, his presence looming, but she remained distant, her silence a quiet rebellion. Frustrated, Morris commanded his personal staff to select the finest gowns, shoes, and jewels, every detail meticulously arranged to mold her into the image he wanted the world to see. Yet, when the evening finally arrived, Ivy emerged not in the delicate pale dresses chosen for her, but in a striking, bold gown that demanded notice. The fabric clung to her like a second skin, the color vivid and unapologetic, a deliberate defiance against the carefully crafted image Morris had intended. His eyes flickered with anger, but he suppressed the storm beneath his calm exterior, unwilling to cause a scene. He took her hand, guiding her to the waiting car. The tension between them was palpable, less about conflict and more about the fragile dance of power and vulnerability. In that moment, the gala was no longer just a performance for the crowd. It became a battleground for control, respect, and unspoken truths. The gala buzzed with whispered conversations and stolen glances as Ivy moved gracefully through the crowd, a glass of wine delicately balanced in her hand. She smiled softly, fully aware that every eye was drawn to her, the center of attention, the woman who had transformed from a quiet, broken figure into someone radiant and untouchable. Yet, amid the swirling murmurs, Morris sat apart, watching silently. This time, he made no effort to steal the spotlight. Instead, he nursed his wine with a distant, calculating gaze. Revenge had clouded his vision for too long, blinding him to the woman he'd truly brought into his world. She was no longer the fragile, hopeless virgin girl he thought he owned. She was brave, fierce, and alive in a way that unsettled him deeply. Morris rose, attempting to bridge the space between them, extending his hand in a silent invitation to dance. Ivy hesitated briefly, then pulled back, her retreat a clear boundary. He wanted more, closer, more intimate moments, but the harder he reached, the more she slipped away, drifting like a flame just beyond his grasp. That night, Morris lay awake, restless and tormented by thoughts of Ivy. She had refused him, drawing a clear line he couldn't cross. Yet, the colder and more distant she became, the stronger his desire grew, twisting inside him like a storm he couldn't control. As he stared into the dark ceiling of his room, all he wanted was a chance. A single conversation to bridge the growing gap, to say the apology he could never voice. Unable to bear the silence, he rose quietly and paced the dim halls of the mansion, each step heavy with longing and regret, searching for a way to reach her heart despite the walls she built around it. The soft knock on the door went unanswered. Morris hesitated, his hand lingering on the wood before, driven by a restless impulse he couldn't ignore, he gently pushed it open. The sight that met him was unexpected. There she was, undressing, the soft light casting delicate shadows across her skin. His heart twisted with a sudden ache, and instinctively he turned to leave, unwilling to intrude on her vulnerability. But before he could step away, Ivy's hand found his wrist, steadying him, pulling him back with silent determination. Without hesitation, she closed the gap between them, her lips pressing fiercely against his, in a kiss that spoke of all the emotions left unspoken, the anger, the guilt, the longing that had been caged for far too long. Morris responded with equal hunger, his hands wrapping around her waist, pressing her firmly against the wall as if to claim the moment, to claim her. She reached up, hands exploring the strong lines of his back, her touch filled not with submission, but with a fierce fire that mirrored his own. Both tired of restraint, they lost themselves in the wordless scream of desire that connected them. Their lips parted only long enough to find the bed where they collapsed together, tangled in each other's arms, the heat between them growing with every breath. Morris's hands roamed reverently over her, his fingers tracing the delicate curves of her body with a tenderness that belied the fierce passion burning beneath. Ivy's breath hitched, soft moans escaping her lips as his touch ignited every nerve, every hidden corner of her skin coming alive beneath his fingertips. The room was filled with the sound of their shared desire, their sighs, their whispered names, the rapid beating of two hearts finding rhythm in the same song. Morris looked down at her, eyes dark and searching, his voice a husky whisper. "Do you want this?" Ivy nodded, eyes wide with both fear and trust, the vulnerability of her first time held tightly in his hands. With gentle care he leaned down, his lips trailing slow, feather-light kisses along her jaw and neck, his touch both claiming and comforting. Every movement was deliberate, a promise that she was safe, that he would honor the sacredness of this moment. Ivy's hands clung to him as waves of pleasure and nervous anticipation mingled within her, her body opening to him not just physically, but emotionally, surrendering to the connection that had been building beneath the surface. As they moved together, time seemed to slow, the outside world fading until only the two of them remained, lost in a profound, tender intimacy that spoke of healing, of beginnings, and of a love forged in the fires of pain and hope. In the quiet aftermath, Ivy pulled away gently, her breath shallow, eyes searching his with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. This was all new, her first time, and the weight of it pressed heavily on her heart. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she had never allowed herself before. Morris reached out, cupping her face with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the fire that had burned between them moments before. His voice was soft, steady, a lifeline amidst the whirlwind of emotions. "We wanted this," he whispered, his eyes never leaving hers. "It wasn't just me. You wanted it too." Ivy's lips trembled, tears threatening to spill, but in that moment, she felt a fragile thread of trust weaving between them. He wasn't just the man who had bought her life. He was the man who, despite everything, was trying to meet her where she was, offering something real beneath the shadows of their past. Slowly, she nodded, allowing herself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe this could be something more than pain and control. Weeks passed before the subtle signs began to reveal themselves, though Ivy was slow to recognize their meaning. Fatigue settled deeper into her bones, and small waves of nausea caught her off guard, yet she pushed the thoughts aside, unwilling to face what they suggested. It was Mama Grace, ever watchful and wise, who finally noticed the changes. One afternoon, pulling Ivy aside with gentle concern, she urged her to take a pregnancy test. Fear gripped Ivy's heart. She worried how Morris would respond, knowing how distant he had been since their last intimate moments. Despite the occasional thoughtful note or bouquet he sent, the uncertainty of his readiness to become a father loomed large in her mind. Still, she followed Mama Grace's advice, the wait afterward filled with trembling anticipation. When the test confirmed her fears and hopes, she was pregnant, Ivy felt a rush of emotions swirling within her. The silence was thick when she finally stood face to face with Morris in the opulent parlor, the weight of what she was about to reveal hanging heavy between them. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and unyielding. Silence followed, thick, suffocating. She searched his eyes, bracing herself for the storm she expected. "I know you don't want this," she said quietly, "and that you're not ready." His eyes searched hers, a mixture of surprise and something unspoken, flickering beneath his guarded exterior. Then, with a voice raw and urgent, he pleaded, "Please keep this child. I may not be the man you dreamed of, not the perfect father or partner, but I'm willing to change. For you. For us." Ivy's heart ached with the truth of their situation, yet she met him with steady resolve. "This is our child," she said softly, placing a hand over her growing belly. "I don't know how to be a mother, but I'm willing to try, with you by my side." His shock gave way to something tender and unguarded as he stepped closer, his hand reaching out to rest gently on her stomach. In that touch, filled with unspoken promises, a fragile hope was born, one that neither of them could yet name, but both silently prayed would endure. She smiled through the tears that clung to her lashes, not out of weakness, but from a place of deep knowing. This wasn't the fairy tale kind of love told in bedtime stories. It was the kind that rose from ashes, carved through heartache, betrayal, and slow-burning redemption. A love that wasn't handed to them. They fought for it, bled for it, earned it. Ivy and Morris were never about perfection. Their bond was built on fire and forged through storm, and now, after everything, they stood together, not in fantasy, but in truth. Not all love starts with kindness. Some stories begin in silence, in control, in pain. But what matters is where it leads, toward healing, toward growth, toward a connection even life's sharpest trials couldn't sever. Ivy and Morris's story proves that love isn't about how it begins, but how it survives, through choices, through forgiveness, and through the strength to rewrite the ending. Have you ever been loved in your most broken state? Have you ever forgiven someone who once felt like your enemy? Or maybe you've loved someone when every reason told you not to. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Your story matters, just like this one. If this journey stirred something in you, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and send it to someone who needs hope, because real love stories remind us that even in ruins, something beautiful can rise.